If you've ever wondered why some of your vegetables never seem to thrive, even when you care for them like the rest, the answer might be the shade. So today, we will go through 20 crops that you should never grow in a shady garden. If you want to save yourself time and frustration, make sure to watch until the end, so you'll know exactly which crops to avoid planting in low light. The first vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is the pepper. Whether it's a sweet bell or a fiery chili, peppers simply refuse to perform without full sunlight. They thrive on heat and long days, and without those conditions, they struggle. In shade, peppers grow tall and spindly. Their leaves turn pale, and most of the blossoms drop before they can form fruit. Even when they do manage to produce, the peppers come out small, thin, and lacking in that full, rich flavor you're hoping for. Peppers are tropical by nature, which means they depend heavily on sunlight to power photosynthesis and keep the soil warm. In shaded spots, soil tends to stay cooler and damper, which leads to trouble. Low temperatures slow root growth, while excess moisture encourages fungal issues like root rot. It's a combination that almost always ends in disappointment. Some gardeners assume partial shade will be fine, but peppers don't compromise well. They need at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight every day to develop strong stems and productive fruit. Anything less, and you'll be left wondering why your plants look so sad. If your garden doesn't get much sun, skip the peppers altogether. Instead, use that space for leafy crops that handle shade much better. Spinach, arugula, and Swiss chard all stay healthy and flavorful in low light. And if you still crave a bit of spice, mustard greens or wasabi arugula can bring that peppery taste without demanding the same intense sun exposure. So when it comes to shady gardens, peppers are one of the first vegetables to cross off your list. Save your sunlight for these heat lovers, and dedicate your cooler corners to crops that actually appreciate them. The second vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is the eggplant. Just like peppers, eggplants are heat-loving crops that demand full sun to thrive. They originate from warm regions, which means they rely on strong, direct sunlight to produce those glossy, full-size fruits we all enjoy. In the shade, their growth slows to a crawl, their leaves turn dull, and the plants often fail to flower or set fruit at all. Eggplants are especially sensitive to both temperature and light. Without at least 6 hours of direct sunlight daily, they become leggy and weak. The few fruits that do appear are often small, misshapen, or bitter. Shade also keeps the soil cooler, which eggplants dislike. They prefer warm soil to develop healthy roots and support steady fruiting. When the ground stays cool and damp, you risk fungal diseases like wilt and rot, which can wipe out the entire plant before harvest time. Even partial shade can cause issues. Eggplants in low light tend to attract more pests, such as aphids and flea beetles, because weak plants can't defend themselves as effectively. You might notice holes in the leaves or flowers dropping before they have a chance to form fruit. If your garden doesn't get much sunlight, you're better off skipping eggplants entirely. Instead, grow plants that can handle cooler, shaded conditions. Leafy greens like lettuce, kale, or spinach will thank you for that protection from the sun. They thrive in the very spots where eggplants fail. In short, eggplants are not shade-tolerant in the slightest. They need warmth, direct sunlight, and dry, airy soil to perform well. Trying to grow them in shade will almost always lead to disappointment and a lot of wasted effort. Now, if you're finding this video helpful so far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more gardeners like yourself, who would also find it so helpful to avoid these mistakes. All right, let's keep going. The third vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is the cucumber. Cucumbers are fast-growing vines that love heat and sunlight. They rely on long, bright days to produce the energy needed for their rapid growth and heavy fruiting. In the shade, cucumbers quickly lose their vigor. Their vines stretch thin and weak, the leaves fade to a lighter green, and the plant struggles to flower or form fruit. Without enough sunlight, cucumber plants spend all their energy trying to reach for the light instead of focusing on fruit production. The result is small, misshapen cucumbers that are often watery, bitter, and far less crisp than those grown in full sun. Shade also keeps the surrounding air and soil damp, which can encourage powdery mildew, one of the most common cucumber diseases. Cucumbers need a minimum of 6 hours of direct sunlight each day, though they perform best with closer to 8. Sunlight helps them photosynthesize efficiently and keeps the soil warm enough for steady growth. When that light is missing, pollination becomes a problem too, since fewer bees and pollinators visit shaded gardens. You may find lots of flowers, but very few cucumbers forming. If your garden doesn't get full sun, don't waste space on cucumbers. Instead, try vining crops that tolerate shade better, like peas or pole beans. They climb beautifully and still give you harvests even in partial light. In the end, cucumbers simply aren't built for dim corners. They crave light, warmth, and airflow. When denied those, they turn weak and disease-prone. For a shady garden, save that valuable space for crops that will reward you instead of disappoint you. The next vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is zucchini and the other summer squashes. These plants are vigorous, but that energy only shows up when they receive strong, direct sunlight. They sprawl without purpose, produce fewer flowers, and set very little fruit. Leaves become pale, stems elongate, and the overall plant looks tired rather than lush. Summer squash relies on sunlight to fuel rapid growth and consistent flowering. With less than 6 hours of direct sun, the plant shifts resources away from fruiting. You end up with a lot of foliage and very little on the plate. Shade also keeps the canopy damp, which encourages powdery mildew. That familiar white coating spreads faster in low light and poor airflow, and once it takes hold, productivity drops even more. Pollination is another concern. Zucchini needs active pollinators to move pollen from male to female flowers. Shaded beds attract fewer bees, and the flowers often open for a shorter window when conditions are cool. The result is incomplete pollination, misshapen fruit, or blossoms that simply close and fall off. Even partial shade can cause timing issues. Fruit may set late and then stall, giving you tiny squash that never reach harvest size. The plant is doing its best, but without consistent sun, it cannot maintain the steady pace that makes summer squash so prolific in bright conditions. If your garden runs shady, skip zucchini and save your space for crops that appreciate softer light. Leafy greens such as spinach, lettuce, and chard handle partial shade very well. For a vining option, peas offer reliable pods without demanding intense sun. If you want a similar culinary role to zucchini, consider patty pan or small fruited varieties only if you have a brighter pocket. But in deep shade, even those will disappoint. In short, summer squash needs sunlight, warmth, and airflow to shine. In shade, it struggles, mildews, and underproduces. Place it in full sun or pass it by. The fifth vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is winter squash, including pumpkins. These plants are sprawling powerhouses that need room to stretch and, even more importantly, plenty of sunlight to fuel that growth. In shady spots, they simply can't build enough energy to sustain their vines or ripen those large, heavy fruits. Without strong light, winter squash vines grow weak and tangled. Leaves become smaller and lose their deep green color, a clear sign that the plant isn't photosynthesizing efficiently. Flowers appear late, pollination rates drop, and the fruits that do form tend to be small, pale, and often fail to mature before the weather cools. Shade also keeps the soil moist and chilly. conditions that invite diseases like downy mildew and root rot. Pumpkins in particular are slow to mature, and each fruit takes a lot of energy to develop. Without 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight daily, that process gets cut short. The vines may flower beautifully, but by fall, you'll find yourself with soft, undersized pumpkins that never reach their rich orange color. Even partial shade can be enough to throw off their rhythm. These plants thrive in wide open spaces where sunlight and air can circulate freely. Shade not only limits growth, but also traps humidity under the dense leaves, creating a perfect environment for mildew and pests. If your garden doesn't get full sun, it's best to skip winter squash and pumpkins altogether. Use that area for crops that can handle the cooler microclimate, like kale, collards, or beets. You'll get a more reliable harvest without the struggle. Winter squash needs bright light and long days to reward you with big, healthy fruit. In shade, it's a losing battle every time. The sixth vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is corn. Corn is a full sun crop through and through. It evolved for bright, hot conditions and uses a very efficient photosynthesis pathway that switches into high gear only with strong, direct light. In shade, plants stay short, stalks are thin, and the overall stand looks patchy rather than uniform. Corn productivity depends on sunlight at two critical stages: vegetative growth and ear filling. When light is limited early on, the stalks never build enough strength to support tall growth. Later, during tasseling and silking, shade disrupts timing. The tassels may shed pollen when the silks are not ready, or the silks may emerge when pollen is already spent. That mismatch leads to poor pollination, missing kernels, and ears that never fill from tip to base. Shade also keeps the soil cooler and more humid around the base of the plants. That can encourage fungal diseases and make stalks more prone to lodging after a summer storm. Short, weak corn is also more tempting to pests, since stressed plants have a harder time outgrowing minor damage. Even partial shade is a problem. Corn needs at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sun, and more is better. It also prefers to be planted in blocks so wind can carry pollen from plant to plant. In a shaded yard, you often cannot give it both the light and the block planting it needs to succeed. If your garden has limited sun, skip corn and choose crops that still perform with fewer rays. Leafy greens, herbs like mint and parsley, and root crops such as beets can make good use of those cooler beds. If you want something tall for structure, trellised peas will climb in partial light and reward you with tender pods. Corn is a feast and sunlight is the chef. Without generous sun, the harvest never makes it to the table. The seventh vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is okra. This plant comes from hot, tropical climates where sunlight blazes down for long hours each day. It thrives in those conditions, producing tall, sturdy stalks covered in pods. But take away the light, and okra quickly loses its vigor. In the shade, it becomes thin, slow-growing, and stingy with fruit. Okra depends heavily on warmth and direct light to grow strong stems and to keep producing pods over a long season. In low light, it stretches upward searching for sun, which makes the stalks weak and unstable. Leaves become smaller, pods develop slowly, and yields drop sharply. Even if you do get pods, they're often tough, fibrous, and not nearly as tender as they should be. Shade also affects soil temperature, and okra hates cool roots. When the ground stays damp and chilly, the plants stall out and are much more vulnerable to fungal problems like wilt and damping off. Combined with reduced airflow, shaded conditions can also encourage pests such as aphids or spider mites to linger, because the plant's natural defenses are weaker. Some gardeners try to squeeze okra into partial sun, but even then it rarely performs well. Okra needs a solid 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight every day to thrive. In full shade, it's simply not worth the effort. If you're working with a shady garden, look for substitutes that enjoy cooler, softer light. Crops like collard greens, kale, or even bush beans can fill that space and still give you good harvests. In short, okra is a plant that loves the heat and demands the sun. Without both, it turns sluggish and unproductive. In shaded gardens, it's one of the first crops you should cross off your list. The next vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is watermelon. Technically a fruit, watermelon is one of the most sun-demanding crops you can plant. It thrives in blazing heat, soaking up long days of light to grow massive vines and develop those big, sweet, juicy melons everyone loves. In the shade, though, everything slows down. Growth becomes sluggish, vines stay short, and the fruits that form are small, pale, and lacking sweetness. Watermelons need full sunlight to photosynthesize at a high rate. Each fruit requires a huge amount of energy to fill with sugars and water. When sunlight is limited, that process simply can't happen efficiently. The result is watery, bland fruit that takes forever to mature, if it ripens at all. Shade also affects temperature and airflow, both of which watermelons rely on. These plants like warm, dry conditions, not cool, damp ones. In shaded gardens, soil tends to stay moist and cool, which invites fungal problems like powdery mildew and anthracnose. The vines become prone to disease, and the fruit is more likely to rot before harvest. Even partial shade can interfere with pollination. Watermelon blossoms are only open for a short time each morning, and if that period falls during low light, bees and other pollinators are less active. Poor pollination leads to misshapen melons or fruit that fails to set altogether. If your garden doesn't get strong sunlight, skip watermelons and try crops that still give you a sweet reward in less light, such as strawberries or rhubarb. They handle partial shade far better and won't leave you disappointed. Watermelons are pure summer plants. They crave heat, sunlight, and open air. In shade, they might grow, but they'll never taste like the ones ripened under a hot golden sun. The ninth crop you should never grow in a shady garden is cantaloupe, along with other melons like honeydew and muskmelon. These plants are close cousins to watermelon, and they share the same appetite for heat and direct sunlight. Without it, they simply can't build enough sugar or energy to produce sweet, flavorful fruit. In shady spots, their vines grow thin and weak, flowers take longer to open, and most of the tiny fruits that do appear never mature properly. Cantaloupes are particularly sensitive to sunlight because the sugars that make their flesh fragrant and sweet develop through photosynthesis. Less sunlight means less sugar production, and that translates to melons that are bland and watery. It's also common to see the plants stay small, with sparse leaves that don't provide enough protection for the fruit. The exposed melons can then rot or become targets for pests. Shade keeps the soil damp and cooler than these warm-season plants prefer, which invites fungal issues like powdery mildew. Once that white fuzz shows up on the leaves, it spreads quickly, cutting off the plant's ability to produce energy. That's why shaded areas almost always result in sickly vines and poor yields. Partial shade doesn't help much either. Even 4 or 5 hours of sunlight a day isn't enough for a healthy melon crop. These plants need at least 8 hours of full, strong light, preferably more, to develop properly. If you love melons but have limited sunlight, consider growing smaller, shade-tolerant fruits instead. Strawberries, raspberries, or currants will give you a sweet harvest without all the stress of trying to force melons where they don't belong. Cantaloupe and other melons are pure sun-seekers. Without heat and light, their flavor never develops, and the harvest ends up more frustration than reward. The 10th plant you should never grow in a shady garden is oregano. While many herbs tolerate a bit of shade, oregano is not one of them. This Mediterranean native is used to baking in the sun, thriving in dry, well-drained soil and intense light. Without enough sunlight, oregano quickly loses its bold aroma and concentrated flavor, leaving you with weak, bland leaves that don't add much to your cooking. Oregano needs sunlight to produce essential oils, which are what give it that strong, earthy, slightly peppery scent and taste. In shade, the plant grows tall and floppy, with fewer leaves and less fragrance. The stems become thin and delicate, and the overall plant looks unhealthy and pale. If you've ever wondered why store-bought oregano smells so much stronger than the one you grew in the corner of your yard, sunlight is the reason. Low light also encourages dampness, which oregano dislikes. It prefers dry conditions, and shaded gardens often hold on to moisture longer. That can lead to fungal issues like root rot or powdery mildew, especially when airflow is limited. Once those take hold, the plant deteriorates quickly. Even partial shade can be enough to dull oreganos. Flavor. Ideally, it needs at least 6 hours of full direct sunlight every day to stay compact, bushy, and aromatic. Less light leads to more stem than leaf. And by the time you harvest, you'll notice that your oregano just doesn't have the same punch. If your garden doesn't get enough sunlight, skip oregano and opt for herbs that perform better in shade, like parsley, mint, or chives. They'll give you fresh flavor without the struggle. Oregano is a sun-loving herb that rewards you with flavor when it gets the light it craves. In shade, it loses its identity and becomes just another weak green plant. The next item on our list is thyme. Like oregano, thyme hails from the sunny, rocky hillsides of the Mediterranean. It's built for bright light, dry air, and lean soil. When planted in shade, it loses its compact shape, stretches out weakly, and its flavorful oils fade away. The result is a plant that looks scraggly and tastes dull. Thyme relies heavily on sunlight to stay dense and aromatic. Each tiny leaf is packed with essential oils. When grown in full sun, but without enough light, those oils don't develop properly. You'll notice fewer leaves, more leggy growth, and a much weaker scent. Instead of that crisp, herbal snap you expect when you rub a leaf between your fingers, shaded thyme just smells faint and grassy. Another issue with growing thyme in shade is moisture. This herb is naturally drought tolerant and dislikes sitting in damp soil. Shaded spots tend to hold humidity longer, which leads to soggy roots and fungal problems like root rot or mildew. Once that happens, the plant rarely recovers. Even partial shade can take a toll. Thyme might survive in a spot that gets 4 or 5 hours of light, but it won't thrive. Its growth will slow, and its flavor will never reach the level of sun-grown plants. It's the difference between a vibrant kitchen herb and a decorative plant that doesn't do much for your cooking. If your garden doesn't get full sun, it's better to grow herbs that appreciate cooler conditions. Mint, parsley, or lemon balm will all perform better and stay lush in partial shade. Thyme needs sunlight to concentrate its flavor and maintain its strength. In shady gardens, it loses the very qualities that make it special. Keep it for the bright, sunny spots where it truly shines. The 12th plant you should never grow in a shady garden is rosemary. This tough, fragrant herb might seem like it can handle anything, but shade is one thing it simply can't tolerate. Native to the dry, sun-drenched hills of the Mediterranean, rosemary needs bright, direct sunlight to stay strong, flavorful, and compact. In shady areas, it quickly loses its shape, becomes thin and woody, and the leaves lose their signature pine-like scent. Rosemary thrives on sunlight because that's how it produces its aromatic oils. Without at least 6 hours of full sun every day, the leaves lose their rich fragrance, and the plant's overall health declines. You'll see slow growth, pale leaves, and stems that stretch awkwardly toward any available light. Instead of forming that neat, bushy mound, shaded rosemary turns lanky and sparse. Shade also traps moisture in the soil, which rosemary absolutely hates. It prefers dry conditions with good drainage, and constant dampness in low light can cause root rot or powdery mildew. Once these problems set in, the plant often dies back from the base up. Even partial shade can dull rosemary's performance. You might get a small harvest of leaves, but the flavor won't be the same. The oils that give rosemary its deep, savory aroma depend entirely on strong sunlight and warm temperatures. If your garden doesn't get full sun, you're better off skipping rosemary altogether. Instead, consider shade-tolerant herbs that bring their own fresh flavors, like parsley, mint, or chives. They'll do far better in lower light and still keep your kitchen stocked with greens. Rosemary is one of those herbs that needs to feel the sun on its leaves to thrive. Without it, it quickly loses the strength, scent, and structure that make it such a favorite in sunny gardens. The 13th plant you should never grow in a shady garden is dill. This airy, delicate herb may look light and adaptable, but it's actually very demanding when it comes to sunlight. Dill needs full sun to stay upright, produce fragrant leaves, and develop those umbrella-shaped flower heads that eventually give you seeds. In shady areas, it becomes weak, floppy, and prone to disease. Dill grows fast in bright light, but without enough sun, the stems stretch thin and the leaves lose their feathery texture. You'll often see dill plants leaning heavily toward any light source, with pale yellowish foliage. The plant's signature aroma fades, and because it can't generate enough energy through photosynthesis, it struggles to produce flowers or seeds. Shade also affects dill's lifespan. This herb already has a short growing window, and low light shortens it even more. Shaded dill tends to bolt early or die before reaching maturity. The cool, damp conditions found in shaded gardens can also lead to fungal issues like powdery mildew, which spread quickly on dill's fine leaves. If you're hoping for healthy growth and flavorful harvest, dill needs at least 6 hours of direct sunlight every day. It does best in warm, open spots with good airflow. Anything less, and the plant becomes frail and disappointing. For gardeners with limited sun, try parsley, cilantro, or even chervil instead. These herbs can handle partial shade much better while still adding fresh, aromatic greens to your kitchen. Dill might look delicate, but it's a true sun chaser. Without bright, consistent light, it loses both its beauty and its flavor. In shady gardens, it's one of those herbs that just won't deliver the results you're after, no matter how carefully you tend it. The 14th plant you should never grow in a shady garden is the sunflower. It's right there in the name. This plant lives for sunlight. Sunflowers follow the sun across the sky, soaking up light from dawn to dusk. Without it, they lose their color, their strength, and their size. In the shade, sunflowers grow thin. Their stems bend toward the light, and their blooms end up small and dull instead of tall and radiant. Sunflowers rely on full sunlight to produce strong, upright stalks and large, vibrant heads. Each flower needs hours of light every day to fill its seeds and maintain that signature golden glow. When light is limited, the plants can't generate enough energy for those heavy blooms, and they often topple under their own weight. The result is stunted growth and half-formed seed heads that never fully mature. Shade also affects how well sunflowers pollinate. Bees and other pollinators are drawn to sunny, open spaces. When the flowers grow in dim light, fewer insects visit, and seed development suffers even more. Add in the cooler, damper soil of a shaded garden, and you'll quickly run into root rot and fungal problems, especially around the base of the stalks. Even partial shade isn't good enough for sunflowers. They might survive, but they'll never reach their full potential. The heads will stay small, the stems weak, and the seeds underdeveloped. If you're looking for tall plants that can brighten up a shaded corner, go with foxglove or hosta instead. They tolerate lower light much better and still add beauty to your garden. Sunflowers are the ultimate symbol of summer, but only if they get the full sun they crave. In shade, they lose everything that makes them spectacular. And the next vegetable on our list is the sweet potato. These plants are famous for their lush vines and nutritious roots, but they only perform when they get plenty of sunshine. In shaded conditions, they grow a lot of leaves and very few tubers, leaving you with lots of green and nothing useful beneath the soil. Sweet potatoes depend on sunlight to store energy in their roots. Without strong light, that process slows down dramatically. Instead of forming plump, sweet tubers, the plant keeps sending energy into leaf growth, hoping to find more light. The result is long, trailing vines, with almost no harvest to show for it. The few tubers that do form are usually small, misshapen, and lacking in flavor. Shade also keeps the soil cooler and wetter, and sweet potatoes dislike both. They prefer warm, loose, well-drained soil to expand their roots. When the soil stays damp and cool, fungal issues like root rot and stem blight become more likely. Even a few hours of shade each day can make the difference between a thriving bed and a disappointing one. Another problem is that sweet potatoes take a long time to mature, often over 3 months. Without full sun, they may never reach that point before the weather cools. The vines will look healthy for a while, but when you do dig them up, you'll find little to nothing worth keeping. If your garden is shady, skip sweet potatoes and try root crops that tolerate lower light better, such as carrots, beets, or turnips. They'll give you a much more reliable harvest in those conditions. Sweet potatoes are plants of the sun. Give them full light and warmth, or they'll leave you with an empty bed and wasted effort. The next vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is the tomato. Tomatoes are one of the most popular crops among home gardeners, but they are also among the most light-hungry. Without at least 6 to 8 hours of full sunlight every day, they simply won't produce well. In shaded areas, they grow tall and weak, with few blossoms and even fewer fruits. Tomatoes need sunlight for both growth and flavor. Light drives photosynthesis, which fuels fruit development and helps produce the sugars and acids that give tomatoes their signature taste. In low light, you'll often end up with watery, bland tomatoes that never fully ripen. The plants also become more vulnerable to diseases like blight and powdery mildew because shade traps moisture and reduces airflow. Another common issue in shady gardens is poor pollination. Tomato flowers need warmth and dry conditions for a successful fruit set. In cooler, darker environments, blossoms often drop before pollination occurs. Even when fruit does form, it tends to be small and slow to ripen, sometimes staying green for weeks on end. Many gardeners try to squeeze tomatoes into partial shade, thinking a few hours of sun will be enough. But that rarely works out. Tomatoes are heat lovers through and through. They crave sunlight to stay healthy, sturdy, and productive. Without it, you'll spend months caring for a plant that never rewards your effort. If your garden doesn't get full sun, skip tomatoes and focus on crops that can handle dimmer conditions, like lettuce, kale, or spinach. You can still enjoy homegrown produce without the struggle. Tomatoes are the pride of sunny gardens for a reason. They need warmth, bright light, and space to breathe. In shade, they lose both their strength and their flavor, making them one of the worst choices for low-light gardens. The 17th vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is the bush bean. Beans are often thought of as easy crops, and while they are forgiving in many ways, shade is not one of them. Bush beans need direct sunlight to produce healthy foliage, strong pods, and consistent yields. In shady gardens, they tend to stay small, flower poorly, and produce very few beans. Bush beans rely on sunlight to grow quickly and set pods in a short window of time. They mature fast, but only when they have the light to drive steady photosynthesis. Without it, they grow leggy and pale, the stems weaken, and the plants spend all their energy stretching toward the sun instead of forming pods. Even if pods appear, they are often thin, stringy, and low in flavor. Shade also keeps the soil cooler and wetter, which is not ideal for beans. They prefer warm soil and good airflow around their leaves. In low light, damp conditions increase the risk of fungal diseases like rust or anthracnose. Insect pests, such as aphids, also take advantage of slower-growing, weaker plants, further reducing your harvest. Partial shade can still cause problems because beans depend on warmth to germinate and flower. With less light, germination slows, flowering becomes inconsistent, and pod production drops sharply. The plants might look green for a while, but will yield only a handful of beans, if any. If your garden doesn't get full sun, consider growing leafy vegetables or herbs instead. Crops like kale, chard, or parsley will give you steady results in the same space. Bush beans are quick growers when the sun is on their side, but they fail fast in the shade. Without strong light and warm soil, they never reach their potential and leave you with a disappointing harvest. The next on our list is basil. This herb might seem delicate, but it's actually a sun worshiper through and through. Basil needs warmth and bright light to develop its signature aroma and flavor. In shady conditions, it turns leggy, pale, and loses that rich scent that makes it a kitchen favorite. Basil relies on sunlight to produce essential oils in its leaves, which give it that strong, sweet fragrance. Without enough light, those oils never develop properly. You'll end up with leaves that look fine, but taste flat or even bitter. The stems also stretch thin and weak, making the plant more likely to topple over or break when handled. Shade keeps the soil damp, and basil hates that. It prefers warm, well-drained soil that dries slightly between waterings. Constant moisture in a shaded bed leads to fungal issues like downy mildew and root rot. Once those diseases take hold, the plant's leaves begin to yellow, and it stops growing altogether. Even partial shade can dull basil's performance. It needs at least 6 hours of direct sunlight each day to stay full and leafy. Anything less, and it loses its compact shape and flavor intensity. Gardeners who try to grow basil indoors or in shady corners usually end up with thin, spindly plants that just don't taste right. If your garden doesn't get much sun, skip basil and try herbs that do better in lower light, like parsley, mint, or cilantro. They'll still give you fresh flavor without constant frustration. Basil is happiest basking in the sun, soaking up the heat that brings out its best qualities. In the shade, it becomes a shadow of itself, both literally and figuratively, and it's far better to grow something that actually thrives in your garden's natural light. The 19th plant you should never grow in a shady garden is cilantro. This one might surprise some gardeners since cilantro can tolerate cooler temperatures, but what it really dislikes is lack of light. Shade causes cilantro to grow tall and weak, with thin stems and fewer leaves. The flavor also fades quickly, turning from bright and citrusy to dull and grassy. Cilantro is a fast-growing herb that needs consistent sunlight to produce tender leaves before it bolts to seed. In shaded areas, the plant struggles to photosynthesize enough energy, which slows down growth and makes it more vulnerable to rot and mildew. The stems often become leggy as the plant stretches toward whatever light it can find, and that weak structure leads to quick collapse. Without enough light, cilantro also produces less flavor. Its essential oils depend on sun exposure to develop that fresh, distinctive aroma. Even if the plant looks healthy at first, shaded cilantro tends to taste bland, and the leaves grow smaller and fewer over time. Shade also traps more moisture around the base, which encourages fungal problems, especially in humid climates. Root rot and leaf spot can spread easily in low light, killing the plant before it ever reaches maturity. While cilantro appreciates cool weather, it still performs best in bright conditions with well-drained soil. It prefers at least 6 hours of direct sunlight each day. Without it, you'll be fighting weak growth and poor flavor from start to finish. If your garden doesn't get much sunlight, parsley or chervil can be good substitutes. They grow better in partial shade and provide similar fresh herbal notes for cooking. Cilantro may enjoy cooler weather, but not the shade. Without proper light, it quickly loses both its vigor and its flavor, making it a poor choice for dim gardens. The next vegetable you should never grow in a shady garden is the potato. Potatoes might seem hardy and adaptable, but they actually need plenty of sunlight to produce a healthy crop of tubers underground. In shaded areas, their foliage becomes thin, their stems grow long and weak, and the plants simply don't have enough energy to develop full-sized potatoes. Potatoes rely on sunlight to create energy through their leaves, which then gets stored in the tubers. Without enough light, that energy process slows dramatically. The result is small, underdeveloped and misshapen potatoes, or sometimes none at all. The plants may look healthy on top for a while, but when you dig them up, you'll often find tiny or hollow tubers that never matured. Shade also creates damp conditions, and potatoes are particularly vulnerable to moisture-related diseases. Fungal infections like blight and rot spread more easily when the soil stays cool and wet. In a shaded garden, airflow is limited, and that trapped humidity can wipe out a whole bed of potatoes before harvest. Even partial shade can cause problems. Potatoes need at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight each day to photosynthesize effectively and bulk up their roots. Anything less means less yield and more risk of disease. If your garden gets limited sunlight, choose root crops that can handle lower light better, such as beets, carrots, or radishes. These will grow more consistently and give you a satisfying harvest without the struggle. Potatoes may seem easygoing, but they're surprisingly demanding when it comes to light. Without full sun and good airflow, you'll spend months tending a crop that barely grows beneath the surface. For shady gardens, they're one of the worst choices you can make. The final plant you should think twice about growing in a shady garden is parsley. While it's a bit more forgiving than some of the other crops we've talked about, parsley still needs a good amount of light to develop its strong flavor and lush leaves. In full or heavy shade, it becomes thin, pale, and slow to grow, producing weak stems and fewer leaves. Parsley depends on sunlight to fuel steady leaf growth. Without enough light, the plant struggles to photosynthesize efficiently, which leads to smaller leaves and a weaker taste. Instead of that fresh, vibrant aroma you expect, shaded parsley often smells faint and grassy. The texture also changes, with the leaves becoming softer and more fragile. Shade also keeps the soil wetter than parsley prefers, increasing the risk of fungal issues like root rot and leaf spot. When air circulation is poor, these problems spread quickly through the dense foliage, causing yellowing and dieback. Once that happens, the plant rarely recovers. Even though parsley can handle light shade, it still performs best with at least 5 to 6 hours of direct sunlight each day. Anything less will lead to slower growth and fewer harvests. Gardeners who try to grow it in deep shade often find themselves cutting tiny leaves from stunted plants that never really fill in. If your garden has limited sunlight, try curly-leaf parsley instead of flat-leaf varieties. It tends to tolerate slightly lower light, though it even needs some sun to thrive. Alternatively, go for herbs that genuinely enjoy shade, like mint, lemon balm, or chives. Parsley might seem easygoing, but it still craves sunshine to deliver its best flavor and form. In heavy shade, it loses both, making it a poor choice for dark corners of the garden. Thanks for sticking with me through the entire video. If you found this helpful, give it a like, subscribe for more gardening tips, and check out our other videos on growing a better garden.